Most of the time, I like to cover free speech issues and stuff like that, and I had this one actually sent to me by a few people, and because people were saying it was a free speech issue, and the problem is, if it is a speech issue, god damn, don't make me have to defend Just Stop Oil. Don't make me have to defend Just Stop Oil. But if I must, I must. Insulate Britain activists. I just said Just Stop Oil because Insulate Britain, Just Stop Oil. They're all partly they're all under the same umbrella. Insulate Britain activist jailed for 8 weeks for contempt of court. David Nixon disobeyed the judge's order not to mention the climate crisis as motivation during trial over road blocking protest. Now, that is a curious thing. Not being allowed to say why you committed the crime. That's a weird one. I don't think I've ever came across that in a criminal trial. I mean, usually the prosecutors and the police and judge are very, very interested in your motivation for why you committed the crime, because that factors into the judge's verdict. That factors into the judge's sentence and the jury's verdict. But for some reason, this guy was told not to. Maybe there's a bit more to it than that, so let's see. An environmental activist has been jailed for 8 weeks after disobeying a judge's instruction not to. He's not going to last fucking 5 minutes. Jesus. For 8 weeks after disobeying a judge's instruction not to mention the climate crisis as his motivation during his trial for taking part in a road blocking protest. David Nixon, 36, a care worker from Barnsley, was sentenced at Inner London Crown Court on Tuesday after admitting contempt of court the day before by using his closing address to begin telling a jury about his reasons for protesting. He and 3 others had been on trial for causing a public nuisance by blocking a busy junction in the City of London on the 25th of October 2021. As part of the Insulate Britain campaign, they were found guilty and will be sentenced on the 24th of March. The judge, Silas Reed, had told the defendants not to refer to climate change as motivation for their actions, but during his closing speech, Nixon turned to the subject of insulation and its relation to climate change. That's the bit that I don't understand. Don't talk about your motivation for the crime. I don't think I've ever witnessed that happen in a court. Maybe there are other instances where it's happened, but that I find strange. I find strange because that is something that can have a massive impact and effect on your sentence and the jury's verdict. So that's, I don't know, that I'm gonna see if there's more to it. As Reid directed the jury to leave the court, Nixon said, "That's before moving on to climate change. Posters around the court building are saying that we are on a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator. You've not been able to hear these truths because this court has not allowed me to say them. Our safety is at risk. Our society is at risk." Reid gave Nixon 2 opportunities on Tuesday to apologise for defying the court, which he refused. Okay, he's an annoying dickhead, but I don't know. See, resisting the court. I don't know, I'm sorry, it's based. Nixon, who represented himself, idiot, told Reid he had found the inability to tell the jury why he had taken part in the protest soul-destroying, which, yeah, and I think that it's important information that the jury should know. It may not seem like it at the moment, but I am at peace with my decisions despite the consequences. He says, "I'm in your hands basically, but I think for me this moment is something that you're going to have to reflect on in the future. If London continues to flood, if there are more wildfires, 40-degree heat, these are the decisions that you are having to live with, and this is going around completely unapologetic. I have seen what's happened in the past week. It underlines climate delay and climate action delay. If we were able to say why we did what we did to the jury, they would maybe acquit us, and I'm thinking that's why. I'm thinking maybe that's why they really wanted to jail them. But I'm sorry, if you're on trial, you should be allowed to say whatever you want towards your defence. That's supposed to be the point. You know, that would be like me like going into like the Nazi pug trial and the court saying, but you're not allowed to say that you did it as a joke. That would be really messed up if they did that to me. So even though, yeah, I'll save it for the end. Nixon said he has gone through all other possible legal means to try to persuade people of the need for action over climate change before turning to civil disobedience as a last resort. When I was a care worker, sometimes the young people put themselves in a position where they were not safe, and me as a care worker would have to intervene, and they wouldn't like that, and they would tell me to F off, he said. Sometimes I had to intervene to keep them safe, and I see very much sitting in the road in similar similarity to that. And I know I'm annoying people and it's not a nice process, but ultimately I'm trying to keep people safe. I see what I did yesterday in similar terms. The rule of law would not survive the consequences of climate breakdown, and by not taking that into account, judges are failing in their function to keep people safe, Nixon said. I don't mean to disrespect the court, or maybe I do mean to disrespect the court, because the court is disrespecting itself. It's not upholding what it is there to uphold, he said. If I was able to speak truth to fellow members of society, I'm putting myself in their hands to make the decision to do what I think is right. At the moment, it feels like I'm putting myself in your hands. I see myself as a good member of society, a good person who doesn't know what to do. Passing sentence, Reid said, during the trial I ruled that you could not give evidence of your motivations for your action and could not refer, except in a very limited way, to climate change and the cost of living crisis. He told Nixon the criminal courts were solely there to establish whether the prosecution had proven the guilt of the defendants. You said the court is not upholding what it is there to uphold, he said. You were wrong about that. This court is here to determine whether people have committed crimes. And the court's also supposed to hear their reasoning behind the crimes, because that is supposed to factor into the decision. By defying his orders about what could be mentioned in court, Nixon had put that function in jeopardy and created a risk that the trial would have to be repeated, Reid said. Your contempt is very serious because it represents a complete disrespect for the court and the court process, he said. You compounded the initial contempt by continuing to speak. I find it hard to think of a more calculated and deliberate contempt. Reid said he had reduced the sentence he would otherwise have been given by a third because Nixon had pleaded guilty at the earliest opportunity. A spokesperson for Insulate Britain said locking people up for telling the truth in court was the mark of an extreme authoritarian regime. And I'm not going to call it the truth or anything like that, but yeah. You should be allowed to say stuff like that in court. We declare that the British legal system no longer has legitimacy in our eyes, they said. God damn, look at us, agreeing on something. The courts will continue to be a site of non-violent civil resistance for as long as it takes for the judiciary to do what is right. This means refusing to criminalise peaceful members of the public who are desperately trying to save lives and prevent the loss of our pensions, our economy, our NHS, the very fabric of our society, and everything that we hold dear. Okay, so having arrived at the end of this, this is bullshit. It does not sit right with me in any way whatsoever. Being charged with a crime, now that's the thing, is motivations come into it as well. Like, the amount of time that you get sentenced to. See, for example, if you were a judge and you hear a guy comes in and he's like, you committed murder? Yeah, we've got all this evidence here that proves you did in fact commit the murder. Now it's your turn to hand down sentence. And the guy turns around and goes, I did it because my motivation was I actually kind of like it. I get off on it sexually. I'm a bit of a Jeffrey Dahmer, like that type of thing. That's when you're going to go, all right, okay, son, that's a chair. Bye. But then if you look at the motivations for another case and the guy goes, I did it because the man molested my daughter. Yeah, that changes things. That changes as okay, I still need to give you something. All right, 8 years with 6 years of supervised release. That's like that type of thing, right? So the motivation behind the crime, is a factor in the jury arriving at their decision, but it's also a factor in the judge passing his sentence. The motivation for the crime is very important. In fact, the police have an entire fucking science dedicated to finding out the motivation, the motive behind crimes. Right, so the fact that this guy wasn't allowed to say his motivation in court at his own trial, in fact, he was expressly forbidden to do so under threat of contempt of court, that does not sit right with me. That doesn't sit right with me at all. That's a mistrial. That's not a fair trial in my eyes. The defence should be allowed to say whatever they deem necessary in order to get a not guilty verdict. Right, the fact that I don't know, it's a case of, okay, I don't agree with all the climate change stuff like that, but in their eyes, it was a noble cause. If they thought it was a noble cause, they should have been able to say, I did it because of the X, Y, Z, and I thought it was a noble cause. Basically, courts see you very differently even if you broke the law, your intentions in your eyes were pure. Right? So, yeah, I'm calling shenanigans this, even though I don't like Insulate Britain, don't like Just Stop Oil. I think they're dumb little students that fucking have no idea how the world works, and instead of going after the actual problem, they're just annoying your average man in the street. No, this was a complete injustice that was done to this guy. He should have been able to say his piece in court. I hope I don't ever have to defend these guys again.